Welcome to the deep dive, where we really try to cut through the noise of these dense technical sources.
And give you that foundational knowledge you actually need.
Exactly, all organized and prioritized. Today, we're taking on, well, one of the most critical subjects for any pre-health learner.
It really is. We're talking about the architecture and resource management of the cell.
Specifically, we're diving into Chapter 33, the metabolism of purine and pyrimidine nucleotides.
And these are not just, some obscure pathways. We are talking about the very building blocks of life, the precursors to DNA, RNA, and pretty much every energy molecule you rely on.
Like ATP, GTP.
All of them. ATP, NAD plus SAN, coenzyme A. Our whole mission today is to distill this chapter, focusing on the regulation, the key differences between the systems, and most importantly, why things go wrong.
Right, in major diseases like gout and Lesch-Nyhan syndrome.
Exactly.
And, before we even get into the chemical weeds, there's one fact that I think immediately reframes this entire topic.
I think I know what you're going to say.
If you eat a high-protein meal, all those purines and pyrimidines you're consuming, they are not the main source for building your own DNA.
That is such a critical distinction. Our bodies don't just, absorb and paste those foreign fragments in. Instead, we synthesize them de novo from scratch.
Using smaller pieces that are already lying around.
Right, from amphibolic intermediates, our bodies are meticulous little factories, making precisely what we need when we need it.
Okay, let's run with that factory analogy. Synthesizing these molecules is obviously essential, which is why they're considered dietarily non-essential. But if we were to rank the supply lines for purines, what's the hierarchy?
Well, de novo synthesis, building them from scratch, is overwhelmingly number one. It's the most important, but it's also incredibly energy intensive.
So the cell has backups.
It has to. It has two vital resource management systems. The first are the salvage pathways, where you recycle existing free purines. And then finally, you have the phosphorylation of purine nucleosides.
So let's focus on that huge de novo construction site first. The process that builds inosine monophosphate, or IMP. What's the one step that kicks the whole thing off?
The master switch, the real driving molecule here is phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate, PRPP.
PRP. Yeah.
The very first committed step is an enzyme PRPP synthetase converting ribose 5-phosphate into PRPP. This molecule is absolutely crucial because it acts as the initial scaffold.
The foundation upon which the whole purine ring is built.
Exactly. If you don't have that scaffold, construction can't even begin.
And building on that scaffold is, it's chemically intense. Instead of listing every single atom source, what are the big contributors a learner should really lock in on?
Okay, focus on the major players. Glycine is a huge one. It provides 3 whole atoms. Then you have glutamine, which contributes 2 key amide nitrogens.
And the folate groups?
Yes, the activated folate derivatives, those are essential for delivering 2 of the carbons in the ring. The main point here is that this whole thing requires massive coordination. You're burning ATP, glutamine, glycine, folates.
And I love that the source material points out the efficiency here, especially in eukaryotes. Many of the enzymes in this long chain aren't just floating around.
No, they're bundled together as multifunctional catalysts.
It's like a chemical pipeline.
It is. It creates metabolic channeling. Intermediates are handed from one active site to the next, which prevents them from, just floating away. It's efficiency by design.
So once this efficient pipeline produces IMP, the path immediately splits. One branch to AMP, the other to GMP.
And this is where the cell shows its genius for what we call cross-regulation.
This is one of my favorite parts. It's such a high-yield concept for understanding how a cell manages its economy. So how does it ensure a perfect, balanced pool of both adenine and guanine?
It uses this brilliant dependency system. So to convert IMP into AMP, the cell has to spend energy, but it has to spend GTP.
Not ATP.
Right. And conversely, to convert IMP into GMP, the cell has to spend ATP.
So the production of one nucleotide literally depends on having a healthy supply of the other one.
You've got it. If your AMP levels suddenly drop, your GTP levels will also fall, and that automatically stalls your GMP production. The system it self-balances.
That balancing act is incredible, and this whole complex, energy-hungry pathway is exactly why it's such a great target for chemotherapy.
Absolutely. If you can stop a cancer cell from making these building blocks, you can stop it from dividing.
So we talked about the need for activated folates.
Right, so antifolate drugs like methotrexate, they block the enzymes that regenerate those folates. It stops purine synthesis dead in its tracks. You can also use glutamine analogs, which compete with glutamine and stop those key nitrogen transfers.
And even further down the line, right?
Yep, drugs like 6-mercaptopurine can inhibit the specific enzymes that convert IMP out to AMP and GMP.
Okay, so that's the expensive de novo construction. What about the energy-saving operation, the salvage pathway? What does this recycling center do for the body?
It's vital, especially for certain organs. Instead of going through all 10 steps and burning all that ATP, salvage reactions just take a free purine base like adenine or guanine and reattach it to PRPP.
And boom, you have a mononucleotide again.
It's like picking up perfectly good, unused bricks from the construction site and taking them straight back to the warehouse. So much more efficient.
And the key workers here, the enzymes we need to know, are the phosphoribosyl transferases.
Yeah.
And the big one is hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosyl transferase.
HGPRT. You have to remember that one.
We will, because when it fails,
Yeah.
it's a catastrophe.
It is. But let's also think about organ specialization. The liver is really the main factory, the main supply center, where most of the high-energy de novo synthesis happens. But other tissues,
Like the brain.
like the brain, red blood cells, certain white blood cells, they have very low levels of the key de novo enzymes.
Wait, so if the brain can't really build its own purines from scratch, does that mean it's almost entirely dependent on the liver to ship them out?
That is precisely right. The brain relies on those exogenous purines supplied from the blood, made in the liver, and then uses its salvage pathways to recycle them.
Which explains why regulation has to be so incredibly stringent.
Exactly. Since the whole process is such a resource sink, the control has to be tight.
So where's the main control knob?
It starts right at the gate. The concentration of PRPP itself is the biggest determinant of the de novo rate. The enzyme that makes it, PRPP synthetase, is feedback inhibited by all the final products.
AMP, GMP, ADP, GDP.
All of them. If the cell has enough finished product, it tells the driver to stop making the scaffold. It's that simple.
And then layered on top of that is the beautiful cross-regulation we already talked about. AMP blocks its own synthesis, GMP blocks its own, and they each need energy from the other.
It's just this exquisitely tuned system, perfectly designed to balance energy with information storage.
Okay, let's pivot now to the pyrimidines, cytosine and thymine. First, how do we even get the deoxyribonucleotides, the DNTPs, for DNA in the first place?
Right, so deoxyribonucleotides are actually made by modifying the ribonucleotides that are already there.
So you make the RNA version first.
Essentially, yes. The ribonucleoside diphosphates, the NDPs, have their 2' hydroxyl group reduced. That little chemical change turns them into DNDPs.
And the enzyme that does this is a big one.
It's a massive enzyme complex called ribonucleotide reductase. And this complex is, well, it's the ultimate gatekeeper for DNA precursor availability. It's only really active when a cell is dividing or repairing its DNA.
And it needs help to do its job, right?
It does. The whole process requires reduced thioredoxin, which then gets regenerated by another enzyme, thioredoxin reductase, and that step consumes NADPH. It's all subject to these really complex controls to make sure you have balanced pools of all 4 DNTPs.
You don't want mistakes in your DNA.
I do not.
Now, let's contrast how pyrimidines are built versus purines. You said PRPP's role is different. How?
This is the fundamental structural difference you have to grasp. With purines, PRPP is the scaffold from step 1. With pyrimidines, the chemical ring is actually assembled first.
From simpler precursors.
Right. And only after that ring is fully built does PRPP come into the picture to get attached.
Okay, so what are the first steps of building that ring?
It all begins in the cytosol with an enzyme called carbamoyl phosphate synthetase II, CPS2.
And this is a key point for any student. This is not the same enzyme as in the urea cycle.
Completely different. CPSI is in the mitochondria for the urea cycle. CPS2 is in the cytosol for pyrimidines. Compartmentation is key. So CO2, glutamine, and ATP combine to make carbamoyl phosphate, which eventually, after a few steps, becomes orotic acid.
And then orotic acid finally meets PRPP.
Then it meets PRPP, forms OMP, and that becomes UMP. And we see that same enzyme bundling trick again.
The efficiency.
Exactly. The first 3 enzymes, including CPS2, are all part of one big multifunctional protein called CAD. Again, it's all about channeling intermediates and keeping things tightly controlled.
We should spend a second on thymidylate synthesis. Because thymine is only for DNA, this feels like a really important targeted step.
It's a huge target for cancer drugs. To make TMP from DUMP, you need the enzyme thymidylate synthase, and this is the only reaction in the entire pyrimidine pathway that requires a tetrahydrofolate derivative.
To donate that methyl group that makes them unique.
Correct. And the moment it donates that methyl group, the tetrahydrofolate gets oxidized to dihydrofolate, so you have to regenerate it.
Using dihydrofolate reductase.
Yeah.
Or the whole process grinds to a halt.
Precisely. Which is why the drug methotrexate, an antifolate, is so potent. It inhibits that reductase, so cells that are dividing like crazy, needing tons of TMP for new DNA, they're killed by this. It's chemical warfare aimed right at replication.
And what about pyrimidine regulation? Where's the main throttle?
It's right at the beginning. That first enzyme, CPS2, is activated by PRPP, but its feedback inhibited by the final end product, UTP.
Which again connects everything together.
It does, because PRPP synthetase, the gatekeeper for the purines, is also inhibited by both purine and pyrimidine nucleotides. The systems are constantly talking to each other to keep the pools balanced.
Okay, let's shift to the breakdown pathways. Catabolism. Because this is where the clinical picture just diverges so dramatically, starting with purines. Why do they cause so many problems for humans?
The whole issue at its core is solubility.
Okay.
The pathway breaks down adenosine and guanosine, goes through hypoxanthine and xanthine, and is finally converted to uric acid, and the enzyme for that last step is xanthine oxidase.
Uric acid, the problem child.
The problem child. Because we humans, we lack an enzyme called uricase. Most other mammals have it, and it converts uric acid into a really soluble compound called allantoin, but we don't have it.
So uric acid is our final end product.
Yeah.
And it's not very soluble.
Not at all, especially in the slightly acidic environment of our joints. So when your serum urate levels get too high, they exceed that solubility limit.
And you get crystals.
You get sharp sodium eumate crystals precipitating in your joints and soft tissues, which triggers that incredibly painful inflammatory condition we call gouty arthritis.
And this leads us directly to the most, I think, striking genetic disorder in this whole system. Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. We have to unpack this one. What is the single enzyme defect?
It's that critical salvage enzyme we mentioned earlier, hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosyl transferase, HGPRT.
A defect in HGPRT.
Right. And without it, the cell can't recycle its free purine bases. This has two just massive metabolic consequences.
Okay, consequence one. The bases can't be recycled, so they have to be broken down. That leads to a massive overproduction of uric acid, hyperuricemia.
Exactly. And consequence two, and this is what drives the worst symptoms. Because HGPRT isn't working, it's not consuming PRPP.
So the scaffold molecule, PRPP, builds up to sky-high levels.
Sky high. And all that excess PRPP aggressively pushes the de novo pathway into overdrive. So the patient is just exponentially overproducing purines and therefore uric acid.
That dual hit explains the severity. The hyperuricemia, the kidney stones, and those tragic neurologic symptoms, the spasticity, and that bizarre compulsive self-mutilation.
Devastating. And we also see immune problems tied to purine metabolism, like with adenosine deaminase or ADA deficiency.
How does that work?
Well, a buildup of DATP, which is a product of that broken pathway, ends up inhibiting ribonucleotide reductase. This starves the rapidly dividing T and B cells of the DNA precursors they need, and that leads to severe combined immunodeficiency.
Now contrast all of that severity with pyrimidine catabolism. Why are pyrimidine breakdown issues, well, so much milder in general?
It all comes back to solubility. The pyrimidine ring breaks down into these very simple, highly water-soluble products, things like CO2, ammonia, beta-alanine.
Stuff the body can easily get rid of.
Exactly. They're easily excreted, so even if the pathway is overactive, the body just handles the output without crystals forming.
But there are a few rare exceptions.
Yeah.
Like erotic aciduria.
Yes. In classical type I erotic aciduria, you have deficiencies in the enzymes that convert erotic acid to UMP. So erotic acid builds up. But there's a secondary form that reveals this really fascinating connection between pathways.
The urea cycle connection. How can a defect in a mitochondrial urea cycle enzyme suddenly cause a pyrimidine problem in the cytosol?
It is a perfect case of what happens when compartmentation fails. If the mitochondrial enzyme, ornithine transcarbamylase, is deficient, it can't process carbamoyl phosphate inside the mitochondria.
So the carbamoyl phosphate has to go somewhere.
It gets forced out into the cytosol, which just happens to be where pyrimidine synthesis occurs.
And when all that extra carbamoyl phosphate floods the cytosol.
It aggressively stimulates the pyrimidine synthesis enzyme, CPS2. It's like flooring the accelerator on the pyrimidine pathway, leading to this massive, unregulated overproduction and excretion of orotic acid.
So a backlog in one pathway becomes the overdrive fuel for another.
That's it. That kind of cause and effect relationship is exactly the kind of insight that makes this material so essential.
It really is.
And, one final clinical connection here is a disorder called dihydropyrimidine dehydrogenase deficiency. That enzyme is key for pyrimidine breakdown. If a patient has low levels of it and you give them the anti-cancer drug 5-fluorosil,
The body can't break the drug down safely.
correct, the drug can build up to catastrophic toxic levels. It's a perfect example of how knowing about a rare genetic issue can directly impact modern medicine.
A fantastic point. Okay, let's wrap up with the absolute essential takeaways for our learners.
I'd say 3 core points. First, the architecture. Remember that PRPP is the starting scaffold for purines, but it's only added later for pyrimidines.
Second, the regulation.
Yes, that genius cross-regulation. You need GTP to make AMP and ATP to make GMP. That keeps the pools balanced.
And third, the clinical story, the catabolism. Purines break down to insoluble uric acid, think gout, Lesch-Nyhan. Pyrimidines break down to soluble products, which means far fewer clinical problems.
Understanding the flow and why the choke points matter, that's everything.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on as you integrate all this. We talked about waste products. There's a molecule called pseudodNA, a modified nucleotide from RNA breakdown, that's excreted completely unchanged in our urine. We just lack the enzymes to break it down.
Right, it's just waste.
So what might the constant presence of this harmless junk product reveal about the sheer age and the deep conservation of these foundational metabolic pathways across eons of evolution? Something to ponder.
That's an excellent concept to end on.
And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. We want to say a huge thank you to the Last Minute Leisure team for providing the brilliant resources we used today. We wish you the very best in your studies.
Until next time.